Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming. This is probably, I've been at CSIS for 16 years, but I don't think there's anything I've more looked forward to than this. And obviously, I'm so grateful that all of you would come to be a part of it. This is something very new for us. I was recruited to come to CSIS by Sam Nunn, who had just become the chairman of the board at CSIS. And when we moved into this building, the day we moved in, Senator Nunn said that he wanted to step down from being chairman. He'd been chairman for 17 years. And the board was understandably surprised and shocked a bit, and but then when they understood that was going to be the case, I started receiving phone calls, and Linda Hart, who was the vice chairman, she called me and Mitch and said, we want to recognize Sam Nunn's remarkable contributions at CSIS for all these years. And it started before he became chairman. Probably our most famous contribution was a lot of the intellectual stuff that turned into Goldwater Nichols. And of course, the Nunn-Lugar program had its origins in work that was done. So it was so much that we wanted to celebrate. So the board decided to establish an annual recognition award named after Sam Nunn for bipartisan leadership in national security. And there's no more fitting way that in perpetuity we will celebrate the contributions this remarkable man has made for all of us. It's been for our collective well-being that this country is safer, stronger, because we had him in key leadership roles. So we're very proud for that. So I would at this stage ask Senator Nunn to come up. I've asked him to just reflect a bit on this. He's not gonna, he didn't like this, but I made him do it. So would you please welcome him with your applause? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, John Hamre, for your friendship and for your outstanding leadership of this wonderful and very valuable institution. I thank the entire CSIS family for the wonderful honor of making this award in my name. I'm particularly honored that this prize and lecture spotlight and encourage courageous leaders who demonstrate vision and wisdom in addressing global challenges and who most of all put our nation's interest first. A few years ago, Ash, and true story, another great Secretary of Defense, Bill Perry, was presented a Sam Nunn Award by a group of my close friends. It was a statue in my likeness. It was about 3.5 feet tall, weighed about 100 to 150 pounds. About 2 years after Bill received the award, he was leaving his position as Secretary of Defense and he and Lee were about to drive back to California. Bill and Lee invited Colleen, my wife, and I to dinner at their Alexandria townhouse, which overlooked the Potomac River. Now, Bill may deny this today, but before our enjoyable evening concluded, he quietly and quite sheepishly confessed that he had no way to move the Nunn statue back to California. And he then gave a very subtle hint as to the future. He said, someone in the future, Sam, just might discover a statue looking like you at the bottom of the Potomac River. So, Ash, I think our friend Bill will tell you that this handsome award, which you're going to get tonight, is one heck of a lot better than a 150-pound statue looking like me. It's really an honor, terrific honor. The honor of having this award in my name is really doubled and tripled because of the immense credibility and accomplishments of the organization giving the award, CSIS, and the individual who is the inaugural recipient, Ash Carter. Ash Carter has a boatload of accomplishments, including his very important partnership with Bill Perry in developing the concept of preventive defense, which continues to shape much of America's national security strategy. Both as a civilian and in his important roles, and he's had several, in the Department of Defense, Ash has identified the most compelling threats we face, and he's helped shape our response. From the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction, to protecting unsecured nuclear weapons and materials, to preventing catastrophic terrorism, to responding to a rising China, all sorts of initiatives involving the dangers of terrorism in the Middle East. Ash has been a thought and action leader for a long time. He's had a very large footprint, and he continues to take big steps, from cutting-edge technology development to procurement and acquisition reform, to the force of the future, to always keeping the well-being of our troops and their families on his front burner of concern. Always that is a priority. On a personal note, I know my friend Dick Lugar, sitting here in the front row, will agree with me when I say that Ash was the key to the creation of the so-called Nunn-Lugar Act in 1991. Ash applied his scientific and analytical skills to the full implications of the breakup of the Soviet Union. He responded to the emergency call from Nunn and Lugar. He came to Washington. He presented his convincing analysis to explain the threat, and he used his personal and professional credibility to help us win over a skeptical Senate, and it really was skeptical. So thank you, Ash, for your outstanding leadership and for your continued leadership in the important role you play today, and I know you will in the future. I cherish my years as part of the CSIS family for many reasons. At the top of my list is the CSIS consistent, nonpartisan approach to addressing our nation's challenges. One of our brilliant scholars, I also see him here, John Alderman, recently wrote, and he sent me the article, and I quote him, "Wins come most often from a delicate ability to appreciate the views of others, but politics today have become a zero-sum game," end quote. I think John is close to being right, and the CSIS approach to solving our most pressing challenges is needed today more than ever, in my view. The term nonpartisan has become a trademark of this institution. The CSIS formula, however, goes far beyond ignoring political labels, which we do, and it goes beyond having Democrats and Republicans working side by side, which we do. Listening to a full range of viewpoints, learning from each other, and most importantly, letting the facts have an important bearing on the conclusions are key ingredients of the CSIS formula. This approach requires a large measure of respect for others and a spirit of civility, too often absent in today's political arena. Columnist David Brooks, in a brilliant article several months ago, noted that, and I quote him, "Civility comes from a sense of personal modesty, from people who know that their own individual powers are limited and that they are useless without input from others, others who argue with you, correct you, and introduce you to the elements you never thought of," end quote. To me, civility does not mean eliminating passion and debate from our discussions, nor does it mean agreeing on every issue for agreement's sake. Civility does mean, as I view it, listening with a genuine desire to understand. It means being open to being persuaded. It means that when you disagree with others, you do so without demonizing them. It means respecting others as sincere patriots who love America and partnering in a shared quest for answers that are practical, effective, and workable. I believe that this is the real CSIS formula, and I know it works. It is my hope that this award will both identify these qualities in our honorees and encourage them in our nation's leadership. Secretary of Defense Ash Carter, as our first nominee, makes it absolutely certain that we're off to a great start. Thank you very much.
So let's get you out in the middle and you can... And it does not weigh 150 pounds.
Highly portable.
Let me just say a word of something to you. Ladies and gentlemen, you have in front of you Dr. Carter's background. I don't need to read it to you, and you'll all get much more out of listening to him. But I would say I've had the real privilege of working with Ash for probably 30 years. And no one has been better prepared, both in academic background or in life experiences or in temperament, to be Secretary of Defense. Ash Carter has been our man. He's kept us safe and free. Thank you. Would you please welcome him for this award?
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for that kind introduction, John, and for the first ever Nunn Prize. This is a particular honor for me because I have such respect for both CSIS and for Sam Nunn. More on him in a moment. I'm pleased tonight to get together with so many legends in our foreign policy community, longtime friends of mine, of the Defense Department, colleagues past and present. There are just too many of you here. I owe you all too much to do everyone justice, particularly if we ever want to eat dinner, and I do have something I want to say. I do acknowledge and appreciate Zbig's being here, Sam, Carla, Dick Lugar, and more on that in a moment, Michelle, and so many others. Graham here somewhere, there you are. Thanks, each of you, for your service to this country, for your support during my time as Secretary of Defense, and for your continued commitment to our service members and their families, which is real. Few people over the past 50 years have made a more lasting and forward-looking contributions to America's security than Sam Nunn. As a senator, Sam was serious and studious steward of our national defense in the last decades of the Cold War and thereafter. As chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee, Sam was a leader in strengthening and reforming the Pentagon, both. And in the years since, he's been a true statesman, helping guide America's relationship with the world, particularly on nuclear weapons. Through it all, Sam has demonstrated that he understands that America's defense is so vital that we, to whom it is entrusted, must ensure its continuity and excellence across the years, across the domains of armed conflict, not just air, land, and sea, space and cyberspace, across parties from presidential administration to presidential administration. And in that connection, I'm committed to helping President-elect Trump and his team hit the ground running. And also across our government, and from strategic era to strategic era. And that last one is important and is the theme, I think, of what this recognition of Sam Nunn means. Sam and I worked closely together a quarter century ago and with his friend and colleague, Dick Lugar, to confront the unique challenges of another transition between strategic eras at the end of the Cold War. And early in that transition, Sam and Dick, almost alone in the country and the world, foresaw a few important developments. First, the Soviet Union was the first ever disintegration of a nuclear power. Second, while people had considered accidental nuclear war since the Cuban Missile Crisis, few appreciated that nuclear command and control could not be immune from the disintegration of a society in which such controls were embedded. And in that new situation, Sam and Dick knew that deterrence alone would not protect us against destruction. And third, they also appreciated that to prevent that new danger from becoming a threat, the United States would need to work with and not against the custodians of the former Soviet arsenal. And after having spent half a century and billions upon billions of dollars bringing the Soviet Union to its knees, we would need to help them, even fund them, to secure the vast nuclear legacy of the USSR. That last idea, as many of us remember, and as Sam later called it, was a little wacky. It was counterintuitive, it was innovative, it was controversial at the time, but it was right. More importantly, the Nunn-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program that was based on that idea worked. It helped the United States denuclearize Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Belarus, safeguard fissile materials, and destroy dangerous nuclear weapon systems. It did so because Sam and Dick knew that at the time of that time of strategic transition, we needed to be willing to take bold steps, do things that seemed to be counterintuitive, some might even think wacky ideas, and develop new ways of thinking, operating, and investing to continue to keep the nation safe. That's an important lesson to remember today at a time of great change, economic and political and military and social and technological change, and of greater and fiercer competition even than marked those early Cold War years. Competition for the lead and technology and human talent, competition for power, competition of ideas about how the world should be ordered. In this time of strategic transition and against this competitive background, the Department of Defense is making a corresponding transition from an era dominated by over a decade of skillful but all-absorbing counterinsurgency and counterterrorism campaigns to one where we must contend with a wider range of strategic problems. And across this range, DoD is confronting today no fewer than 5 immediate but distinct, each evolving, challenges. We're countering the prospect of Russian aggression and coercion, especially in Europe, something we haven't had to worry about for 25 years, but now we do. We're also managing historic change in the Asia-Pacific, the single most consequential region for America's future. We're strengthening our deterrent and defense forces in the face of North Korea's continued nuclear and missile provocations. We're checking Iranian aggression and malign influence in the Gulf and helping defend our friends and allies in the Middle East. We're countering terrorism and accelerating the certain and lasting defeat of ISIL. And all the while, the Defense Department is also preparing to contend with an uncertain future, ensuring that our military is ready for challenges we may not anticipate today. And a question I'll address in this acknowledgement of Sam tonight is the same as it's been to me for all the time I've been Secretary of Defense, which is how do we successfully confront these challenges and prepare for that uncertain future? And the answer fundamentally is the same as it was 25 years ago. It has been necessary, it will be necessary for DoD to change, to adapt, to innovate, not only meet today's challenges, but ensure that defense's continued excellence well into that uncertain future. So I want to speak tonight about the changes underway to respond to today's challenges, focusing particularly on the military campaign to accelerate the lasting defeat of ISIL, our strong and balanced strategy on Russia, and our rebalance to the vital and dynamic Asia-Pacific. And I'll also describe the actions underway and the innovations we're making to ensure that the Defense Department has the technology, the operational plans, the organization, and the people to continue to defend our country and make a better world for decades to come. Let me start with ISIL. We've reached a critical milestone in our counter-ISIL campaign. As we meet this evening, American forces are engaged with our coalition and local partners in an intense effort to collapse ISIL's control over Mosul and Iraq and Raqqa in Syria, bringing the great weight and our entire range of capabilities to bear in the enabling of capable and motivated local forces. The seizure of these 2 cities is necessary to ensure the destruction of ISIL's parent tumor, the primary objective of our military campaign in Iraq and Syria, and to destroy both the fact and the idea that there can be an Islamic State based upon this ideology, put ISIL on an irreversible path to a lasting defeat. Reaching this milestone is a direct result of deliberate actions taken since 2015. First, and going back to the summer of 2015, I consolidated the efforts for Iraq and Syria under a single unified command, streamlining our command and control for the fight against ISIL, which we had not had. Then, in October 2015, President Obama approved the first in a series of recommendations that I and our Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joe Dunford, made to accelerate the campaign against ISIL, introducing every single tool of our military into this fight. And I should tell you, by the way, that since then, President Obama has approved every recommendation that the Chairman and I have taken to him for additional forces and capabilities, as we've seen and sought to seize opportunities to accelerate the campaign. We then revised our overall coalition military campaign plan, setting out 3 objectives. First, as I said, to destroy the ISIL cancer's parent tumor in Iraq and Syria. Now, that's necessary, but it's not sufficient. So the second objective is to combat ISIL's metastases everywhere they emerge around the world, in Afghanistan, in Libya, and elsewhere. And the third objective is to work with our intelligence, homeland security, and law enforcement partners to help protect our homeland and our people from attack, ultimately DoD's most important mission. The strategic approach of our military campaign in Iraq, Syria, and elsewhere is to leverage all the tools at DoD's disposal to enable capable, motivated local forces to deal a lasting defeat to ISIL. This strategic approach is necessary because the only way to ensure that once defeated, ISIL stays defeated is to enable local forces to seize and hold territory rather than attempt to substitute for them. And consistent with this approach, we've employed some of the U.S. military's most extraordinary capabilities and some of our most specialized personnel, from air power and special operations forces to train, advise, assist capabilities on the ground, to intelligence, cyber tools, logistics. These assets and our personnel have been able not only to help directly enable local forces on the ground, they also bring to bear the full weight of American and coalition military might. By combining our capabilities with those of our local partners, we've been squeezing ISIL by applying simultaneous pressure from all sides and across all domains through a series of deliberate actions to continue to build momentum. For example, when our special operators conduct raids, free hostages, gather intelligence, and capture ISIL leaders, it creates a virtual cycle of better intelligence, more targets, more raids, more airstrikes, and more opportunities we can seize to gain even more momentum. As a result of all this, for over a year now, play by play, accelerant after accelerant, town after town, the campaign has delivered the results we laid out in the plan. And in Iraq, we've been helping the Iraqi security forces and the Kurdish Peshmerga to systematically dislodge ISIL from city after city, Ramadi, Rupa, Fallujah, Makhmura, Kiara, just to name a few. And our coalition is now doing the same in Mosul, having isolated the city of the Iraqis with our help are on the verge of clearing eastern Mosul. And will then move west to clear the remaining portion of the city on the right bank of the Tigris. It's a complex mission. It's going to take some time to accomplish, but ISIL's defenses are beginning to weaken, and I'm confident that ISIL's days in Mosul are numbered. In Syria, we know local partners put an end to ISIL's expansion and then began to systematically roll it back towards Raqqa, an important objective since it's the so-called capital of the so-called caliphate and a hub for plotters of external attacks. After helping capable and motivated local Syrian partners defend Kobani, we in the coalition enabled them and other local forces to take Shadadi, Tishreen Dam, Manbij, Jarablus, Dabiq, and now converging on Raqqa. As they successfully complete the isolation phase of Raqqa in the weeks ahead, we're helping them generate the additional forces that will be necessary to seize and hold that city in the weeks to follow. In addition to taking back territory, our campaign is yielding results in denying ISIL the finances, the supplies, the freedom of movement, and the command and control it needs to survive. We've systematically targeted ISIL-controlled oil wells, revenue depositories, trucks for smuggling and transport. Indeed, just last month, in one of the largest airstrikes of this particular kind to date, we destroyed 168 trucks. One strike, one evening. We've also deliberately focused on severing the territory ISIL controls in Syria from the territory it controls in Iraq. Leaders of the terrorist group can no longer travel now between Raqqa and Mosul without the risk of either being hunted down by our expeditionary targeting force or struck from the air. And since we began accelerating our campaign, we've killed the majority of ISIL's original cadre of senior leaders. While these results in Iraq and in Syria are encouraging, we must stay focused on the continued execution of this plan. The inevitable collapse of ISIL's control over Mosul and Raqqa will certainly put ISIL on a path to lasting defeat, but there'll still be much more to do after that to make sure that once defeated, ISIL stays defeated. The fight against ISIL will continue in Iraq and Syria. In addition, the United States and the coalition will need to continue to counter foreign fighters trying to escape and ISIL's attempts to relocate it or reinvent itself if they survive alive from Mosul or Raqqa. And of course, ISIL's lasting defeat will require the international community and the United States to stay engaged. In Iraq, we need to carry on our work to train, equip, and enable Iraqi security forces, including the Iraqi army, the police, the border guards, counterterrorism forces, and other forces under the control of the Iraqi government to liberate the remainder of Iraq, secure it, and hold the areas cleared from ISIL, even as we continue to support an inclusive and multi-sectarian, though decentralized, Iraq. And because beyond security, there will still be towns to rebuild, services to reestablish, and communities to restore, the international community's stabilization and governance efforts cannot be allowed to lag too far behind the military campaign. And this, at my judgment at this point in the campaign, is my biggest concern. As I said earlier, success in Iraq and Syria is necessary, but it's not sufficient for dealing ISIL a lasting defeat. And that's why we're also focused on the other two critical objectives of our campaign, which are combating ISIL's metastases around the world and helping to protect the homeland. Now, when it comes to combating the metastases, we've taken correspondingly strong actions in support of capable and motivated forces in Libya, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. For example, alongside our Afghan partners, we recently commenced the third offensive against ISIL in eastern Afghanistan. In previous two operations, we and our Afghan partners killed ISIL's top leader in the country. And we also significantly degraded its capabilities and its ability to try to take root there. And of course, destroying the ISIL cancer's parent tumor in Iraq and Syria and defeating its metastases must also help our meet our campaign's third objective, which is to protect the homeland. And on that third objective, DoD is also working, as I said, always with intelligence, homeland security, and law enforcement partners, both home and abroad. But for example, we've worked with the FBI to systematically eliminate members of an ISIL cell in Iraq and Syria that was inspiring attacks against our country, including against our armed forces. And we're continuing to prioritize ISIL's external operations. Campaign against ISIL and its results are another example of our military's continued excellence and America's continued leadership in the Middle East and in the world. No other nation could have brought to bear the combination of resources we have or assembled the coalition we've built and led the execution of a comprehensive campaign as the United States has done. No other nation could have done that. And we did so in pursuit of our nation's interests, which in this case are aligned with many allies and partners who are also resolved to destroy ISIL. And we did so despite major, simultaneous, and growing military commitments in Europe and Asia at the same time. And let me turn to them next. First, I want to discuss Europe. where the transatlantic community is standing up to Russia's provocations and aggression. It's a big change for many of us, Sam, me, many other former Cold Warriors who worked productively with Russia in the post-Cold War era. In the 1990s, our two nations worked together through the Nunn-Lugar program and again on Kosovo, and I remember these and participated both of them personally with common rather than cross purposes. Today, unfortunately, Russia's aggression and provocation appears to be driven by misguided ambitions and misplaced resentment. We see that in Russia's aggression in Ukraine and Georgia, in its counterproductive role in the ongoing tragedy in Syria, its attacks in cyberspace, its hybrid warfare, violation of arms control treaties and other international agreements, and its nuclear saber-rattling. These actions are not what the world expects of a responsible state in the 21st century. Rather, each threatens to undermine global security and erode the principled international order that has been so good, not only to America, but also to Russia and the rest of the world. And let me be clear, the United States should not seek a cold, let alone a hot war with Russia. We don't seek an enemy in Russia, but we are also defending our allies, the principled international order, and the positive future it affords all of us, and counter attempts to undermine our collective security. To do so, the United States is following a strong and balanced strategy. In it, we're addressing Russia's actions and deterring its aggression while pursuing and preserving bilateral cooperation where U.S. and Russian objectives can be aligned. This strategy does not simply recycle the 20th century playbook used to deter Soviet aggression during the Cold War, because that playback would not meet the Russian challenge or match the Russian challenge of today. We haven't had to prioritize deterrence in the transatlantic community's eastern flank for over 20 years. Unfortunately, as I said, now we do. And that's why the United States is strengthening our military posture and presence in Europe to be more agile and quicker in responding to the threats that Russia might pose. Our last defense budget request included significantly more funding for our European Reassurance Initiative, now renamed the European Deterrence Initiative, more than quadruple what we allocated the year before. That's intended to allow us, in addition to the 2 brigades we already have stationed in Europe, to rotate an armored brigade combat team into Europe on a persistent basis starting later this month. And in fact, over the last few days, the equipment we're deploying to support that brigade combat team has arrived in Germany and is on the rails as we speak. ERI in 2017 will also enable us to pre-position a brigade's worth of equipment and warfighting gear to be used by American forces flown into Europe. These among many other steps. We're also increasing military exercise with allies and partners to demonstrate resolve and to build their resilience while enhancing interoperability with them. We're updating and refining our contingency and operational plans, including ways to overcome emerging threats such as hybrid warfare and anti-access area denial systems. We're investing in the technologies most relevant to countering Russia. And we're also recapitalizing our nuclear deterrent, because nuclear deterrence is not only the bedrock of our security, but also critical to sustain in light of Russia's nuclear saber-rattling. The United States is not alone in any of this, of course. For more than 67 years, NATO has been the quintessential example of nations coming together to respond to collective security challenges. And as it did during the Cold War, NATO will be critical to preserving collective defense in the face of new and renewed threats. To ensure it does, NATO too is adapting to use a new playbook, one that prepares to counter cyber threats and hybrid warfare, to better integrate our conventional and nuclear deterrence, and much, much more. That's why NATO created a very high readiness joint task force that can deploy allied forces on 48 notices to any crisis or allied territory. That's why NATO is also deploying 4 battalions to its eastern flank, 1 each in Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. The latter, by the way, is where the United States will lead a battalion starting in April this year. And it's why NATO is providing support to partner countries like Ukraine and Georgia to help strengthen and reform their national defense institutions and to improve their ability to work with NATO. Everything the United States is doing, both on its own and with NATO, will ensure that we continue to stand up to Russian aggression and that we're ready for longer-term competition. But it's also necessary to keep the door open to working with Russia when and where our interests align or can be made to align. And as I said, there was a time in the years after the Cold War when Russia cooperated with the United States and other nations, contributing to the principled international order rather than undermining it. I remember that personally, and so do many of you. And perhaps someday we'll see that spirit rekindled. Next, I want to discuss what the Defense Department has to do to carry out the security aspect of President Obama's rebalance to the Asia-Pacific. The rebalance has ensured that DoD will continue to help provide the security necessary for that consequential region, home to nearly half the global population and nearly half the global economy, and allow it to remain a place where everyone can rise and prosper. That's been American policy and practice since the end of World War II. Regardless of what else was going on at home or in other parts of the world during Democratic and Republican administrations in times of surplus and deficit, war and peace elsewhere, the United States has remained economically, politically, and militarily engaged in the Asia-Pacific. Now, unlike elsewhere in the world, peace and stability there has never been managed by a region-wide formal structure like NATO in Europe. That's made sense because the Asia-Pacific's unique history, geography, and politics. Instead, the United States has long taken a principled and inclusive approach and collaborated with a network of regional allies and partners to enable security and uphold important principles like resolving disputes peacefully, ensuring countries can make choices free from external coercion and intimidation, and preserving the freedom of overflight and navigation guaranteed by international law. Because we did so, out of the rubble of World War II, economic miracle after economic miracle occurred. Think about it. First Japan, then Taiwan, South Korea, and Southeast Asia, and now, today, China, India, and others rose and prospered. That progress has produced incredible changes in the region. Populations are growing, education has improved, freedom and self-determination have spread, economies have grown more interconnected, and military spending and cooperation are both increasing. Amid all this remarkable change and progress, America's interests and objectives in the Asia-Pacific have endured. We still want peace, stability, and progress there for all, including ourselves. But as the region has changed, our approach to how we advance our interests and uphold those enduring principles has had to change along with it. Today, as the Defense Department has been operationalizing one phase after another of the military part of the rebalance, we're not only ensuring we remain the strongest military and primary provider of regional security, we're also connecting and further networking our allies and partners in a burgeoning, principled, and inclusive security network that will allow all of us to see more, share more, and do more to maintain security in the region. In the rebalance's first phase, DoD sent tens of thousands of additional American personnel to the region, committed to home porting 60% of our naval and overseas air assets to the Asia-Pacific, and began to modernize our regional posture around Guam as a strategic hub. In the second phase, which we launched almost 2 years ago, we committed to sending some of our best people and our most advanced capabilities to the region. Our newest submarines, aircraft, and surface warfare vessels, for example, even as we develop new and innovative strategies and operational concepts for the principal contingencies that could occur there. We also significantly strengthened our bilateral alliances and partnerships, nurtured over decades, tested in crisis, and built on shared interests, values, and sacrifice. We've now strengthened these relationships so they better reflect 21st century security needs. There are many examples to point to in the region, whether it's our longtime alliances with Japan, the the Republic of Korea and Australia, or our newer growing partnerships with India, Singapore, Vietnam, and others. Now, in the third phase, it will be necessary to cement the progress we've made in the first and second, and more importantly, to build on it. It'll be necessary for the United States to continue to sharpen our military edge so we remain the most powerful military in the region and the security partner of choice by increasing and targeting investments and capabilities suited to the region to ensure we stay the best there. We'll also continue to make leap-ahead technological investments, including some surprising ones that will help us keep the lead in the Asia-Pacific as well as elsewhere. And will further catalyze the Asia-Pacific's growing, principled, and inclusive security network. Although it's not a formal alliance like NATO, this burgeoning network, built on trilateral, multilateral, as well as bilateral relationships, is grounded in those principles I mentioned earlier. It's inclusive, since any nation and any military can contribute. That's the American approach. And that's all to the good for the region and the United States. But it's important to remember the rebalance in this Asia-Pacific security network are not aimed at any particular country. Networks not closed excludes no one. Now, although we have disagreements with China, including over its destabilizing behavior in the South China Sea, and its behavior is in fact driving many more to work more closely with us, we're committed to working with China where possible, to introducing measures to reduce risk, and to encouraging China to avoid self-isolation. All this is happening today. But even as we confront the challenges of this time of strategic transition, it'll also be necessary for DoD to lead and compete well into the future. Today, ours is the finest fighting force the world has ever known. There's no military that's stronger, more capable, more experienced, or more innovative. But that's not a birthright. It's not guaranteed. We can't take it for granted. We need to earn it again and again. And to do so, we have to invest and innovate for the uncertain future we face, as well as deal with the problems of today. And that's why I've been consistently pushing the Pentagon to think, as I put it, outside of our five-sided box, to ensure that our technology, our war plans, our organization, and above all, our people stay the best for decades to come. We've made the decisions and the investments to ensure DoD maintains our dominance in every domain, not just sea and air and land, but also space and cyberspace. We're pushing the envelope in research and development, despite the budget woes, to stay ahead of our competitors and at technology's frontier by putting, for example, nearly $72 billion into R&D alone this year. And to give you a little context, that's more than double what Apple, Intel, and Google spent on R&D combined in 2015. Beyond that, we've been building and rebuilding bridges between the Pentagon and America's technology community. One way we're doing that is through our Defense Innovation Unit, Experimental, or DIUX, which I created to help connect with startups and other commercial tech firms in Silicon Valley, Boston, Austin, and everywhere in between. Those outposts are already producing results. DIUX has interacted with companies in over 30 states to help us adopt technologies more quickly that can help our warfighters accomplish their missions. We always will continue to need our excellent existing and traditional defense partners that help us build our amazing defense systems, but DIUX will also help better connect the Pentagon as a whole to the entire world of American innovation. That's an investment worth making. Because when I started my life in science and technology and national security, most technology of consequence came from the United States, and most of that from government sponsorship. We're still an influential force, but it's not just us in the Defense Department anymore. To stay the best, we need to interact with the rest of the technological ecosystem. We're also innovating operationally in our operations plans. Our core contingency plans are constantly being changed to apply innovation to our operational approaches, including ways to overcome emerging threats such as anti-satellite weapons or hybrid warfare. We're building in modularity, planning new ways for overlapping contingencies, and injecting agility and flexibility into our war plans. And meanwhile, we're making reforms across the DoD enterprise, streamlining our headquarters operations, lowering our healthcare costs, continuing to improve our acquisition processes, and more. We're also continuing to support and seek improvements in the spirit of Goldwater Nichols, which Sam Nunn had so much to do with. Among other changes, to clarify the role and authority of the chairman and the Joint Chiefs and the Joint Staff to help our combatant commanders become more efficient and agile and support me and the President, especially in the face of trans-regional and trans-functional challenges. And we're ensuring DoD is a place where thinking boldly and differently is fostered. One way we're doing so is with the Defense Innovation Board I established last year and chaired by Google Alphabet's Eric Schmidt. Its members are already making a mark. For example, on their recommendation, we have now a Chief Innovation Officer, which many companies have, by the way, to act as a senior advisor to the Secretary of Defense. And lastly, and importantly, and Sam alluded to this, we're building what I call the force of the future to ensure that amidst generational, technological, and labor market changes, we continue to attract and retain and develop the most talented people America has to offer for what is, after all, an all-volunteer force. In total, the Force of the Future initiatives span the career of a uniformed service member or DoD civilian, from recruiting men and women to join, to caring for, retaining, and developing them, and then to helping successfully transition those who want to move on. And these initiatives include reinvigorating and expanding the geographic reach of our Reserve Officer Training Corps program, which, by the way, just had its 100th birthday this year, making common sense improvements to military talent management and officer promotion, giving components the authority to directly hire civilians on college campuses, which is a big deal if you remember your mindset in college, recognizing survey data indicating the importance of family life to retention, bearing in mind that our force is largely a married force, by expanding maternity and paternity leave, extending on-base child care hours, and other steps of this kind. And also ensuring that DoD is able to draw from 100% of the American population. And to compete for the best, we must select the best based solely upon their qualifications to meet our high standards. Not race, not gender, identity, sexual orientation, but rather focusing on whether someone can meet our standards and is the best person for the job. In conclusion, because we're doing all this, because DoD is changing and adapting and innovating, because of our nation's enduring strengths, I'm confident that its future is bright and that there are many opportunities for our country to seize. But I can never forget, and we can never forget, and I'm even more mindful as my days as Secretary of Defense grow short about who makes it all happen. It's DoD's people. Each of our service members and DoD civilians makes me proud, incredibly proud. There are almost 3 million of them serving across this country and around the clock in every time zone on Earth, in every domain, in the air, ashore, afloat, and even in cyberspace, all in service of this great nation. All of them are defending not only the United States and its people, they're also defending the values and the principles that define us, while they provide the security that will enable our children to live a better life. Because they do so, we can gather here this evening in safety and celebrate Sam Nunn. We can go to work tomorrow or study at one of America's world-class universities. We live our lives and dream our dreams and enjoy the freedoms upon which this country was built and for which so many generations of Americans have fought. They make all that possible. And it is at a time when not as many serve, I want them all to know, and I ask you to take a moment to reflect yourselves, that we don't take them for granted. Stephanie, my wife, and I begin every day with them. As all of you know, our mission's demanding and constantly changing, but I couldn't be prouder of them for what they do every day and what they've done for us. Their excellence is unparalleled. Service is invaluable. Sacrifices will never be forgotten. So on that note, let me just say God bless them. God bless our great country. Sam, I'm honored to be here this evening. Thank you for this honor. Let's enjoy this evening.
Mr. Secretary, that was an unbelievably rich survey, and I'm really grateful that you would share it with us. I prepared about a dozen questions, and you answered most of them with your speech, so I'm a little bit of a different spot here. But I would like to ask you to reflect on this more difficult Russia. I would like to publicly say how glad I am what you've done to strengthen NATO. You've taken some extremely important steps to put some vigor back into the alliance. That helps us ensure that we've got a climate that's free of intimidation, but it doesn't help us solve the Russia problem. What else would you recommend that we now do?
Well, I mean, I think the phrase strong and balanced, which I've used, it's not strong but balanced, it's strong and balanced. I think strength is required, both for deterrence and because Russia responds to that kind of strength. And so strength is a part of accomplishing anything positive as well as protecting ourselves. Balanced because, as I said, one needs to hold the door open for a time, which may return but is nowhere in sight at the moment, where Russia views its interests more comprehensively as aligned with the United States and the rest of the world. I say that's not in sight now, and it's not about particular places only. It's about a more comprehensive attitude which defines interest and success in terms of thwarting the United States and the rest of the world. It's very difficult to build a bridge to that kind of strategic motivation. Notwithstanding that, in more particular cases, and North Korea and Iran are non-proliferation have been examples of this, it has been possible to find enough common ground to take common action. We certainly ought to continue to try to find that. That's not been possible, for example, in the case of Syria, for the reason that the Russians have done things that we couldn't possibly associate ourselves with because they're wrong-headed. Namely fueling the civil war rather than helping to resolve the civil war, which they were uniquely positioned to do with Assad, let alone fighting ISIL. So long as, but where it is possible to find areas where we can align our interests, we ought always to do that, John. I mean, in the end, it all begins with our interests. That's our North Star. So there are a lot of parts of the world that are confused. There are lots of countries that are confused and confusing, but we're not confused. We know what our interests are, and we're intent upon achieving them. I wish that were possible across a broader scope with Russia today. Maybe that time will return, but for now we need to do what we can, but also stay strong.
Sir, you didn't, I was surprised that you didn't mention it because it's been a major focus of your effort, and that's to build stronger ties to India. Would you share with us? I think it's been remarkable what's happened over the last year. Why don't you tell us what's your vision and how does it fit in your concept of America's strategic interests in Asia?
Just to be clear, it is a huge thing for me, and I'll tell you why in a minute. It's not just for me. To me, it's such a part of, there are people who want us to start using the term Indo-Asia Pacific region, and I wish I had, but to me that is assumed. But let me explain and hasten to clarify, if it needs it, why India is so important. I say that India is destined to be a strategic partner of the United States. I say that by dint of corresponding systems of government, democracies, both quite diverse countries, both vibrant, innovative cultures in ways that are interestingly aligned. And so if you spin the globe and say to yourself, where do you think 30 years, 40 years, 50 years from now, we will find alignment that is broad and deep. India is one of those places. By the way, Europe is another. And however, we grew up in two separate worlds during the Cold War. And so there's a round peg, square hole issue every time you try to work the two systems together. They grew up separately. It's hard work, but it's work to which I've been dedicated. The key, John, to answer your specific question, is in cooperation in a manner that is consistent with India's own traditions and kind of where it's coming from in its history. And so I've tried to perceive that and work with what I have found there, which is overall very congenial, but values its own independence of action, its own ability to set its own course. Very much values, and this is something that I've discussed often with Prime Minister Modi and is a big theme of what we do, making sure that our defense relationship is not one of big brother, little brother, or purely one of vendor-buyer when it comes to arms, but also cooperator, technology share, as the phrase goes, co-development, co-production. And we have a number of programs of that type. And that is a link to Prime Minister Modi's Make in India initiative in the defense sphere, so it matches that. And another, what I think of as a handshake today, besides that technological handshake, is a strategic one. We have a rebalance to the Indo-Asia Pacific. He has an Act East policy. And once again, that's a natural handshake and one that we're taking advantage of. So that is a complicated project because of the round peg square hole thing. On the other hand, as I said, I have total confidence in it because, as I said, this is something that destiny is going to carry our both countries forward to.
Secretary, you outline, some people are critical to say the administration doesn't have a strategy in Asia, but I think you outlined quite clearly we do. But it's a long-term strategy, building networks of reassurance together. But it doesn't deal with the immediate question about islands being built and being militarized in the South China Sea. Now, I know you're Secretary of Defense, so a certain limit to what you can say in this sort of a venue, but how serious is this?
Well,
and how do we think about this as a...
It's serious. I mean, I won't say how do we use it, because one would never wish to have this motivation. It does have the effect, among others, of driving people into our and therefore has had the oddly paradoxical, has to be the case from the Chinese point of view, effect of strengthening the appetite for working with the United States. And I'm gratified by that. That's not my favorite reason for seeing it occur, but it is what it is, and I'll take it for what it is. For our own purposes, we are allowing it to have, and will allow it to have no effect whatsoever upon our, I always say we will fly, sail, and operate wherever international law allows. We will, we are, and that has no effect on us. Our policy towards reclamation and contesting land claims is quite clear also, and although China is by far and away the largest transgressor of the principle of non-militarization, peaceful resolution of contending territorial disputes in that region of the world, it's not the only one. We oppose them all, but because China's is so conspicuously larger, it deserves and receives, certainly from us, extra opposition. Strategically, we're making the adjustments, and that's the part I can't go into totally, to ensure that our positioning and our ability to carry out our obligations there are not affected. But it's another reason why we continue to strengthen what we're doing there, both qualitatively and quantitatively.
North Korea has always had a penchant for creating a little crisis around political events in the United States. We'll have an inauguration here soon. Likely there will be some provocation. What's your guidance to Jim Mattis, assuming he'll be confirmed, that we have to anticipate and deal with this next round? You've been through several yourself.
Yeah, let me not put it in terms of guidance.
Sure,
to Jim.
I understand.
I
not
want
to
to
Jim.
be
You
careful not to do that. I want to
Right.
say, by the way, Jim Mattis is a friend of mine for 25 years or so. I've known him for a long time, and I'm doing everything I can to make sure he hits the ground running. And one of those is not talking to people
About what you're going to tell him.
But it's easier to talk about the North Koreans, and I'm certainly happy to do that. And you're right, always up to something. And I've worked on that issue for a long time. I'll tell you what my guidance to the department is. And it is this. First of all, generally speaking, we have a slogan for our force and our plans to reinforce our force on the Korean Peninsula, which is fight tonight, which is not what we want to do, but it's something that we're ready to do. And I've been ready for, 70 years now, something like that, with a plan and capabilities that constantly evolve, and by the way, which have improved dramatically lots of different ways in recent years, as has separately but importantly the ROK's, that is South Korea's military as well, and the ways that we work together. So maintaining deterrence. In the specific matter of ballistic missiles, which is the thing I think you're referring to stay ahead of North Korea, we have been consistently taking steps to improve qualitatively and quantitatively our missile defenses, not only of our own territory, but the territory of our friends and allies. So for example, and John, you know all this, but just to say, we have increased the number of interceptors in our GBI, ground-based interceptor system, and the quality of their seeker warheads in recent years, specifically in anticipation of the possibility that North Korea would improve and succeed in ballistic missile programs, and relatedly, obviously, importantly, nuclear weapons. Likewise, the so-called THAAD system or other missile defense systems in the region. So specifically, we stay ahead of that. So both deterrence and defense. I'd like to be able to tell you that the six-party talks and so forth were advancing. That's nowhere in sight, in my judgment. In that connection, I have to say I am disappointed in China. I don't blame them for North Korea, but I think that they have had over the years more purchase on and leverage on the problem than anybody else, simply by virtue of history and economic dependency of North Korea. And I certainly wish they had used it, and my prediction is that Chinese leaders will regret that too, but maybe they haven't reached that point yet, but it's sure to happen.
They're coming close. Finally, let me just ask, and colleagues, I apologize, I'm taking all the questions, but we just didn't have time to go around the room. Let me ask, Secretary, you've pioneered a lot of work on creating an independent cyber command. And the question here is cyber warfare is different in that it's much more against civilian assets that you don't own or control, but you depend on. And the question is, how should we structure cyber defenses for America? You're doing the right thing for the department. How would you say we're doing as a nation?
Well, you can't say we're doing well as a nation because you pick up the newspaper every day and you see one example or another of an outrage. I wish I could tell you we're doing perfectly in DoD, but let me start there, even though you leapt to the nation, but I call it a leap simply because I am intent, and this is Cyber Command's first mission, highest priority mission, which is to defend our own networks, which we do own or at least operate and control. That's important because not only do our systems all depend abjectly on being networked, but you know, our kids do too. And dependent as you all are on your smartphones and emails and stuff, I'm a much more parsimonious user of those, and so because of the number of people who'd like to share in the conversation. But most of you use it more than I do. Our kids don't know any other way. Mm-hmm. And so you can't get them to take an interest in what we're doing unless it has that dimension very strongly in it. So that's a very big deal for us in Cybercom's first job. That said, a defense now, I'm talking about not offense, I can get to too, which is fine, but defense of the nation's infrastructure is, as you say, more complex for the government as a whole, first of all, because we don't own and operate it. It's not all here in this country either, which isn't an impenetrable barrier, but does make it a little trickier. And also is spread around our government in such a way that we are in a supporting role and not a leading role. Homeland Security and law enforcement and intelligence having. We do everything we can, and I have to say that the National Security Agency, which is part of the Defense Department, and I have responsibility for, and gets back to the Cybercom question because they're married for now, at least, and that it is useful in this sense. NSC is our strongest technological asset within the government, and so I'm careful to make sure that we are liberally available to the FBI, to state and local law enforcement, to Homeland Security, and to the intelligence. They have good capabilities of their own, but we're by far and away the biggest dog in that field, so we make that available. But it is an awkward system. It's in the nature of things. It's a little bit, if you ask about education or something, you find out that it's spread over the strata of our government and across a wide range, and so the managerial scope is difficult. I do everything I can as Secretary of Defense to be a
make sure that we are being a capable and positively contributing partner, but the reality is it's a partnership. Therefore, a little awkward there, quite obviously to all of you, far from perfect. So it's a big project for us. It's something, I'll tell you, for me, I don't have any problem spending money on it, and you know our budget as well as I do. We're spending all the money. I don't have any. That's easy for me. My problem is people. Is good people, not money. And finding them, identifying. Now that's one of the reasons why we have had Cybercom and NSA. I've been happy to have that under one so-called hat, both reporting to me, but separate functions. But because I didn't have enough people to staff two good people. Inevitably, and this will be a decision that won't be made in this administration, I think that'll become natural to separate the two, and that's fine. I think that's in the future. It's not a matter of whether, but when and how. And I think that will occur, but that's been a managerial convenience verging on necessity for us. The other interesting thing about the cyber workforce is what are we going to make it out of in the future? What's its composition going to be? Cybercom, we have a lot of uniformed people there now. That's a good thing. They're very good. We did that basically because we got to get our hands on them quickly. Over time, that workforce will mix, and there'll be more civilian. I just predict there will be more civilians and more contractors in the workforce simply as we adjust what the right composition of the total workforce is.
And I think a solution for the nation is going to require more mutual trust between the executive branch and the legislative branch. This is a national security issue. We do have to work this together. People are approaching this with goodwill, and we have to do more work.
Can I say something about bridges also?
Yes,
along
please.
this topic, and you may want to get to other people, but it bridges also between us and the technology community, and that's been another reason for that particular portion of the technology community, which is the tech, IT type community that I've been working so hard to build a bridge. I mean, we can't deny the fact that Edward Snowden destroyed a lot of the bridges between a lot of trust, and I don't want to get started on what I think of that, but the effect of it has been that we have work to do. And I have tried to reach out, find common ground, and try to rekindle the days when the relationship between the Department of Defense and that part of the technology community was much more natural because they were born together, really, in modern DoD and that technology. That's more difficult now. It's not impossible because people who work in that field are by their nature innovative and they want to make a difference. And by and large, they understand that they can't do what they do. And without security, you don't have any of this stuff. And life isn't worth living. And so what we do is indispensable. And that really excites and motivates a lot of people, as it has you and me and many people in this room in the course of their career. And so if they see that they can make a difference and that we're going to create an opportunity for them to do so that is compatible with everything else, their business interests, but they're enough of their personal inclinations that it's not, a complete mismatch. We get them. I find it very gratifying. All these people are really patriotic, dedicated to not just the United States, but to the idea that people ought to be able to live their lives in peace, and you can motivate them with that mission and get that tremendous energy and creativity they have working on our side. You really can. It's just a matter of working at it and, as I said, meeting halfway.
This has been a splendid evening. The trustees wanted to honor Sam Nunn with this award. And Ash, you've honored Sam Nunn by such a splendid speech, and you've been a great gift to all of us. Would you please say thank you with your applause?
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you.